Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff operations officer, assisted the national security team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the vice commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
And Israel in neutralizing Palestine's facilitator, Turkey invading in the north, Israel, as I said, from the south, Russia losing its military bases, presumably. We can talk more about that. China, the end of its Belt and Road as far as its port in the west.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many implications of what's going on as a result of the collapse of Syria that it's hard to know where to start. I mean, it's quite clear that the losers in this conflict were Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. There's no question that for Iran, this is a big blow in the sense that Syria was an ally, an important ally, and very importantly, Syria was a conduit for Iranian weapons to get to Hezbollah inside of Lebanon. And for the time being, at least, that conduit has been shut down. I think the Russians also lost because they were supporting Syria. And of course, Hezbollah lost for the reasons I just described. And the winners are clearly Israel, the United States, and Turkey. How this all plays out moving forward is almost impossible to say, other than it looks like there will be considerable chaos in Syria for the foreseeable future, because it's hard to see a coherent government forming in Damascus that can control the entire country.
I presume you mean short-term success as regards the United States. I don't know when the Mujahideen had a great deal of success in Afghanistan against the Soviets. They were celebrating in some NATO propaganda newspapers and television, and that arguably would lead to 9/11. Is it a short-term success in terms of the United States? And do you see the hand of a frenetic Blinken State Department here ahead of the inauguration of Trump on the 20th of January?
Well, it is a short-term success. There's no question about that. What happens in the long term is somewhat difficult to say. But it is possible that as a result of what's happened in Syria, that Iran will acquire nuclear weapons. And if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, that would be disastrous for Israel, and it would also be disastrous for the United States. And who's to say whether that will happen or not? It's also just not clear what the implications are for Turkey in all of this. I think the Turks believe that overthrowing Assad would lead to a new Syria that would be friendly with Turkey and allow Turkey to solve a lot of its problems, especially with the Kurds. But I wouldn't bet a lot of money on that. I think there's going to be a great deal of unrest in Syria for the foreseeable future. And this short-term victory for Turkey will not turn out to be a positive development in the long term.
Well, the geopolitical playing field in the Middle East has dramatically changed since Bashar al-Assad's government fell, and we see Turkish power flexing and more jihadi terrorism on American soil on New Year's Day. And it's More War Monday here on the Rob Maness Show. We're live on Worldview Tube, our X Spaces simulcast, and Truth Social Plus. The consequences of the dramatic fall of that Syrian government are beginning to reveal themselves more than ever as the new government formed begins to reveal its Islamist nature, quite frankly. Turkey's attacking American allied Kurdish forces in northern Syria. Israel's taking ground in Syria, at least temporarily, as part of its own homeland defense. The specter of Iranian nuclear weapons, as you just heard from Professor Mearsheimer, advances could be speeding up, and that risk has risen over the entire region. And the potential reconstitution of the ISIS caliphate, which a lot of folks here at home are very concerned about, those are all very real concerns. And you combine these conditions with that ISIS-inspired terrorist attack in New Orleans in the early morning hours of New Year's Day, and we Americans should and are justified in our desire to reestablish deterrence on all of our adversaries as quickly as possible in the new Trump administration. Well, my guest today is Dr. Walid Pherez, who's a foreign policy expert, a presidential advisor, a professor, and author of several books, including his latest, I believe, Iran, an Imperialist Republic, and the U.S. Policy. Dr. Pherez, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Thank you so much, Colonel. I mean, I was so happy when I was invited to be on your show, because you deal with historic matters, and thank you for having me in.
Well, when I got the opportunity to reach out to you, I was also very excited because we're in need on this show of a person that fully understands the entire geopolitical field that's going on in the Middle East, and even over into Afghanistan and the Southwest Asia area, and even into Africa. And you're that guy, sir. So we appreciate your time. I know you're very busy and everything. And I guess let's start out with let's take a look at that playing field. In the big picture, outside of Syria itself, Mearsheimer mentioned that a concern that I've had too is that Iran may speed up its development of nuclear weapons and actually get them finished up and in the field. Turkey is flexing its muscle, as I mentioned, and we've heard Mr. Erdogan say multiple times that he thinks the Ottoman Empire or some version of it should be acceptable from the Turkish perspective. The United States seems to be in the middle because we are allied with many of the Kurds, especially the Syrian Defense Forces Kurds that help bring down ISIS, and is actually, I think, if I remember correctly, they're containing an ISIS conclave in northeastern Syria. And then we have Israel, of course, and the Arab nations, the moderate Arab nations, that all have a factor at play in this region. And I haven't even talked about the Muslim Brotherhood and the Iranian view of jihadism, those two themes and ideologies that both embrace fanatical jihadism, which is what leads to these attacks like in New Orleans on New Year's Day. What do you see from your perspective, the strategic outcomes of this fall of the Syrian government as we see them playing out already?
Absolutely. I mean, the most important term in your question, Colonel, is strategic. And very few, unfortunately, in America and the West are interested in the strategic. They just start with the detail and don't look like you've done a wider picture of it. I've been working on these subjects one way or another for 30 years. I can claim that I know every move when they open their mouth. When they say what they want to say, I know exactly where their ideology is taking them strategically. And you mentioned 3 or more 4 players that are strategically important to us in the United States. Let me start with since you asked me the question now about the Islamic regime in Iran strategy. This was a disaster for them. It's not just that, they lost some influence. Losing the coast, the East Mediterranean coast, which is Syria, and Lebanon now is at place because piece of it is with Hezbollah, piece of it is against Hezbollah, which is a file I'd like to talk about when we'll have a chance in this interview. So the Iran Khomeinist regime lost tremendously by losing Syria so suddenly that even themselves were not ready for it. And that would open the gate for us to discuss how did this actually happen. But since, Colonel, you mentioned the nuclear matter, I have had so many briefings with various national security agencies in the United States over so many years, but critically the past 8 years. And I have advanced a different theory. Of course, everybody's focusing on the traditional, uranium work up and down 60%, 40%. To me, this was where the Iranian regime wanted to take us. In fact, it is very possible that they have already or will be very quickly purchasing a completed tactical nuclear weapon. They know very well that if they complete one bomb, there'll be the Israelis, the Arabs, the United States, and others going after them. And the Israelis have shown that they know everything what's happening in Iran. They have shown that they can get inside. So one of the possibilities is that the Khomeinists have already purchased a tactical nuke, but they will only use at a critical time, and that critical time is coming very soon because now they have two enemies. One is historic, it's Israel and the West, and the other one is the Turkish-backed, I would say, jihadist militias in Syria. So that would be one thing we need to warn the new incoming national security team that consider that scenario as well. That's to start with. And then, of course, we have Turkey, and people, again, and we've heard the previous guest who was prominent, saying that Turkey may have now friends in Syria. No, these are not friends of Turkey. These are jihadi militias trained, backed, funded by the AKP power in Turkey. The language is different because so the audience could understand this is very serious. And the AKP government in Turkey has advanced its own direct militia, which is the Syrian National Army, and has funded the HTS, which ATS, as we all know now, at least the expert, is an offshoot of al-Nusra, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. So those who have controlled Aleppo all the way down to Damascus are not a joke. This is a jihadi regime installed in large parts of Syria.
And this regime, Doctor, that's in Syria, where are they aligned? Just for the audience here, I think I've got a good understanding of it. But the alignment between the two camps of jihadism, which is the Brotherhood, and I think correct saying is the Muslim Brotherhood, and then the Khomeinites on the Iranian side. Where does this Syrian regime and set of militias fall into that alignment?
Excellent question. That's what I'm specialized in, is to define the forces and link them to each other. At the very high top, and let's call it quote unquote the Iranian side, because Iranians against the regime don't like that idea that we call them Iran. They're Khomeinists, Islamic jihadists, Khomeinists in the Shia camp. They used to control all of Syria. They had an alliance arrangement with the Alawi regime of Assad. Assad himself is not a Khomeinist Islamist, but he's their allies, like Ceausescu and the Soviet Union at the time. And those, like Syria, organizations were a strategic connector to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is closer to the Khomeinist regime than Assad was, but they were all happy in a big group that made money, and then that was going against Israel. On the other side, you had all sorts of jihadi forces inside Syria. We named them all. ISIS was one, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. HTS, the one ruling now those 5 major cities in Syria, was one of them. I mean, they cannot erase all the YouTubes and all the internet. They want exactly what all the jihadist organizations wanted, which is to seize Syria, make it into, you have the choice, Islamic Republic and Islamic Emirate. And then, of course, as all jihadists in the world want, be piece of that large caliphate. So let's not make a mistake. These are not reformed Islamists. These are actual jihadists. And in my view, 30 years of experience, these are the most smartest ones. Now, who's the mothership? Who actually created all this Sunni jihadists, if you want? The Ikhwan, right. The one called Muslim Brotherhood. So we are in deep trouble, both in the region and internationally. Replacing weak Assad by a strong jihadi force is not a cause to celebrate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when we, in the next segment, I want to get your take a little bit on how these two groups, although they fight each other, they fight each other really aggressively at times. What mechanisms or reactionary policies that the United States or NATO or Turkey or any other entity, the moderate Arab states, might put into place that would cause them to come together like China and Russia have over the Ukraine issue, and then we'll go from there. So we'll be right back with Dr. Walid Phares, expert in the Middle East geopolitics and geostrategic layout and the impacts of what the Syrian government reconstituted as a jihadi type government is going to have on the entire region and probably around the world. We'll be right back on The Rob Maness Show.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed the need for cooperation with Syria's new administration to ensure a smooth transition period. In a phone call on Saturday, Fidan emphasized that Turkey would not allow the Kurdish YPG militia to take refuge in Syria. Blinken, on the other hand, stressed the importance of supporting a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process that prioritizes human rights. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed the need for cooperation with Syria's new administration to ensure a smooth transition period. In a phone call on Saturday, Fidan emphasized that Turkey would not allow the Kurdish YPG militia to take refuge in Syria. Blinken, on the other hand, stressed the importance of supporting a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process that prioritizes human rights and an inclusive, representative government. The two officials also discussed efforts to prevent terrorism from threatening the security of both Turkey and Syria. The conversation underscored ongoing concerns about regional stability and the broader political and security situation in Syria. Additionally, they highlighted the need for continued dialogue and collaboration on counterterrorism efforts in the region. Both sides expressed their commitment to enhancing cooperation in addressing the security challenges posed by extremist groups.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and my guest today is Dr. Walid Pherez, author, professor, and really a worldwide expert on jihadism, the geostrategic field in the Middle East and its periphery, and the impact all of that has around the world. Dr. Pherez, in the little clip there, the entering clip there, I wanted to show that because it does show that the United States and Turkey are talking at the right levels, I believe, the diplomatic level. But I have my concerns when I hear things like the Biden administration, Secretary of State, coming from an idealistic perspective when we're talking about hard power individuals that have taken over this country, aren't we?
Listen, Colonel, I'm going to use a different, rhetoric than usual because I'm on your show. And we have to tell the audience exactly what's happening. These are the last days of the Biden administration. This is the Secretary of State, the Biden administration. They had a plan. They had a narrative. They had a vision, part of which that started in 2009 by the previous Obama administration, which is, and I'm not going to mince my words, to collaborate with the Muslim Brotherhood. That was the direction of the speech of former President Obama when he went to Cairo in June of 2009 and clearly told the Brotherhood, we're going to be working together. We're going to change the traditional foreign policy of the United States. It was translated in 8 years of the Obama administration by wherever those Muslim Brotherhood militias were in Libya, in Egypt, in Tunisia, and but also in Syria. We actually, one way or another, collaborated with them. And now this is the end of that, of that Obama-Biden administration, and they continue the policy, which is to my surprise. When you are in between two administrations, you don't commit the United States in any direction, and that was true for all the previous administrations. Bottom line is, no, we don't have to work with this regime in Damascus before this regime in Damascus tell us exactly where they're going. And they have been speaking to one of our delegations like a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago, and then to many Europeans, with a lot of disrespect, by the way, for the foreign minister of Germany. They told them, we are going to implement our, quote unquote, Sharia law-based jihadi culture in Syria. In the constitution, I'm receiving videos about statements made by this new regime that they're going to actually destroy the secular regime of Syria. So what the conversation was with Mr. Fidan, who is a professional national security advisor of Turkey, and reality on the ground is absolutely different. And I'm warning ourselves and the next administration, be ready, because this cohort of militias, HTS and their allies, are doing in Syria now. They're preparing Syria to become like Taliban, maybe worse because they're more sophisticated and smart and on the Mediterranean, and they have more money.
And they have some very good training from NATO and the West. It's obvious that the HTS leadership has been trained very well, Dr. Pherez. So it was a really good indicator of where this regime's probably going when al Jilani refused to shake hands with the German foreign minister because she's a woman.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, shaking hands is not the big deal. It's why. And why are they putting this on TV? It's to tell their base, this is where we're going. And you're going to go. Just 3 hours ago on Arab TV, they mentioned that the Libyans are concerned, are telling Mr. Jilani, do not send your jihadists to Western Libya. What is in Western Libya? Oil, a lot of oil. So these are not just simple romantic jihadists. These are people who are getting the instructions from Ankara at the end of the day and from the Muslim Brotherhood, and they are ready themselves. Number one, they said, well, that's called taqiyya. It's a modern day expression of an old system, which you can lie till you get to your goals. When they said, the HTS, that we're not going to war against Israel, there is one word that very few people listen to, now. That's not their goal. These are not wild jihadists. These are strategic, smart jihadists, not touching Israel now. You will unify all the other countries under our banner, like Salahuddin. He did not fight Richard Heart of Lionhearted directly. He first united all the forces, and then they went against him.
Yeah, and speaking of oil, the United States is still in control of the eastern Syrian oil fields, correct?
That's true, and I'm issuing another warning on your show. The reason why HTS and others and their supporters wants to dismantle the SDF, it's not just an ideological matter, which it is, because that oil is on the side of the SDF. That's millions and billions of dollars. So they want to seize them. And soon enough, when they finish from the Alawites, they are now going after the Alawite ethnic, cleanse them. The Alawites live along the northwestern part of Syria, and they were the actual same community of Assad, though they are not responsible for Assad's done. But what's beyond the Alawite and the water? One of the largest reserves of gas. That's why invading Syria, taking its western part first, all the way to Damascus, where the central bank has a lot of money, has a lot of gold, is really the deepest goal in this fight.
So do you think the Turkish play in this, obviously allied with HTS very strongly and really has supported them militarily and actually is on some territory in Syria, for the way I understand it. Maybe they're creating a buffer zone, I don't know. But the Turkish play in this is to be able to act through the nation of Syria if HTS can get control of the entire country, to extend its version of this Ottoman Empire that Erdogan keeps talking publicly about?
All of the above, Colonel, all of the above. They're not like one-dimensional. First of all, the ideology that they have circulated, and I'm going to be very clear about it, is a neo-Ottoman, which means it's the jihadi walking towards the caliphate. When would that happen? We don't know. Like recently, last Sunday, there was a demonstration organized by the party in charge, by the son of President Erdogan. And the slogan was what? First Istanbul, then Damascus, then where they're going to go? To Jerusalem. But that's a decoy. They're not going to Jerusalem immediately. They know there is Israel. And they've seen what Israel has done with Hezbollah, Iran. They are going to Amman. I'm announcing this right now. They're going to, once they secure southern Syria, they will go to Amman. And after Amman, you have Saudi Arabia. And that's where the Ottoman Empire was. And of course, it is about the return of the Ottoman Empire. They started with Western Libya that far because they were able to go in. And they used a local government because they don't operate directly. You're not going to see the Turkish army going in. At least for the moment, you're going to see basically militias backed by the Atatürk government.
Right. And I'll just remind the audience that Turkey has the largest armed forces army in that region. And really, it's the largest one in NATO, if I understand it correctly. Well, we've got some hands up in the audience, sir. I'd like to give the audience a chance to ask my guests a question.
Sure.
You've done a great job generating some questions, so we'll go over to our host over there, Shell, and take a question. Go ahead, Shell.
We have Patrick, sir.
Yes, sir. I was listening to what the gentleman was saying about Turkey, but If Turkey is attacking Kurdish forces in Syria and with the U.S. status of forces agreement with a base in Adana and Incirlik Air Base, how does this affect our security in the area and our military infrastructure and assets?
Would you mind repeating, because the audio was not clear, transmission? Can you please, Colonel, repeat?
Absolutely. Essentially, with Turkey attacking the Kurds in northern Syria and the United States status of forces agreements, and as part of a NATO alliance, we have bases like at Incirlik, Turkey. What does that do to as far as our assets go and our capabilities go, both within Turkey and in Syria, because we have troops actually still deployed to northeastern Syria, so that's essentially the nutshell of that question.
Absolutely. I was expecting such a question, and here's the issue. We're not dealing with a chaotic, brutal government. Turkey is a member of NATO. Their leadership is very, very smart. They know exactly how they will avoid every single asset we have. There is no problem with the U.S. bases. Actually, they want U.S. bases there, the same way Qatar love our U.S. base there. It protects them, actually. So no concern.
Right.
Even inside Syria, I wouldn't imagine that Turkey by itself is going to go after our assets at all. They could very easily, avoid those bases and keep pushing. The decision is going to be for the next administration what to do. For example, if the next administration establishes a no-fly zone to protect Kurds, then the Turks will have to make a decision. It's like a chess game, very smart. It depends on both sides. For now, I'm not even worried about what the Biden administration is going to do, because they don't have the time. They cannot back up any policy they will make, have 12 days, 15 days. But it's basically what the jihadists are trying to fill in right now. So when the Trump administration comes in, then we see the lines of confrontation. So, and I imagine that the Turkish-backed forces are not going to be able to take Kurdish SDF overnight. It's not going to happen. But they are preparing for their own militias, HTS, and the other militia to surround every single part. They were not lucky in the south, if I may use that question to answer. HTS forces, jihadi forces, were marching south to get as close as possible to the Golan Heights. Guess who resisted them? The Druze. The Druze communities out of southern Syria organized themselves. They have a very large force of about 20,000 fighters. So if we have interest in collecting more allies on the ground before we start talking about this whole issue of Syria, we need to support those Druze. So we have the Kurds in the north, we have the Druze in the south, and of course this is the area of operation of Israel. So enough hints as to what should next U.S. policy do. But I'm not concerned that the Turks themselves are going to take any action against the United States threat.
Well, you jumped into a point I was going to ask you about before we take this break, and then you can answer on the backside of the break, and that is Israel's activity. I mentioned it in my opening about going ahead and taking ground in its own defense, at least temporarily. I don't think it's permanent, but it is about. Some of it is about the Druze, and after we come back from the break, I want to give you a chance to talk about the relationship with the Druze, and can the United States new administration, are we able to leverage that relationship so that we can build a stronger relationship with that Druze area, and then take a look at the other minorities in the state of Syria, because there's a lot of concern, even outside of the Kurds, with the Yazidis and the Orthodox Christians and those kind of groups. And we'll be right back with Dr. Walid Phares, and this is the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now, and we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
I want to just mention briefly, Mr. President, I say this gently, respectfully, but gently. President Erdogan, the distinguished president of Turkey, leave the Kurds alone. Leave the Kurds alone. Kurds, as you know, Mr. President, are wonderful people. There are probably 30 to 40 million Kurds throughout the world. Some we're blessed to have here in the United States. They live mostly in Turkey, Iran, northern Iraq, and Syria. The Kurds are a distinct ethnic group. They're sort of a stateless country because they're spread all over the world. The Kurds are America's friends. Hadn't been that many years ago since ISIS was rising high. ISIS had established a caliphate in the Middle East. That's a fancy word for a country. They established their own country in the Middle East. And America and other countries beat them back. We destroyed ISIS. They're still there, but we destroyed their caliphate. The people most responsible for helping us, most responsible for destroying ISIS, were the Kurds. We lost less than 20 American lives in destroying ISIS in the Middle East. Our friends from Kurd lost over 10,000.
Welcome back to the Rob Maida Show on Worldview Tube. It's More War Monday, and my guest today is Middle East expert from right here within our own country, Dr. Walid Phares. Dr. Phares, that was Senator John Kennedy from my old state of Louisiana, and a few weeks before the Turks actually attacked the Kurds. I believe that was a couple of weeks ago. But his point was the Kurds sacrificed a lot to help us destroy the ISIS caliphate. And you mentioned the Druze on the front side of the break here, and how the Israelis have taken territory in the Golan Heights and a little bit beyond, I think, for their own self-defense, and how the United States should establish a good relationship with those Druze, because they have an even larger force than the Kurds had in eastern Syria of 20,000 or more. What should the Trump administration do from the perspective of the Druze first, and then we'll talk about the other minorities, including the Kurds in the area, as they look at this situation?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad we're discussing this, because it doesn't have any noise in mainstream media, especially in the national security community. So here's the deal. In the north of Syria, people have their maps. There is a large contingent of Kurdish communities. They are the ones that have the majority in the northeast, Hasaka and around. But with them, so that the public understand, there are some Arab Sunnis who work with and they have access to the desert. So it's more than the Kurds. And they have Christians. You were asking about where are the Christians? Well, part of them is in the northeast of Syria. They are working with the Kurds. They are even serving. They have their own Syriac Christian Council, which is part of their military, working with the Kurds. So that's the north. We have communication with them, the U.S. We have a presence on the ground. Some say 1,800, maybe 1,000, maybe even more. We are aggrandizing this, which is a good thing. And I hope the Trump administration double this and triple this, so that we, create a real defense for the Kurds. In the south of Syria, from the borders of the Golan Heights, which is under Israeli control, all the way to midway to Damascus, they are much closer than the Kurds. They are smaller than the Kurds in terms of size, demographic, but they are so close to Damascus. there has been, over the past 12 years, many attacks against the Druze communities. Suwaida is a village, is a town actually, is their capital. We're going to hear a lot about Suwaida. Suwaida has been attacked by ISIS, by the jihadists, by the Assad regime. And they have, withstood this action. It's like Kobani in the north. And their villages goes all the way until Hermon Mountain, which is the other side of Lebanon. So there are a lot of important links to make, because on the other side you have also the Druze. So basically, the Druze now are under, we're saying it, the Israelis are not saying it, the Druze are not saying it, but we are saying it, in the sense that if jihadi column wants to go down and try to occupy Quneitra, of course, that Israel now inside the Golan, but all these other villages of the Druze, they're going to find that there is a no-fly zone.
So who would implement this no-fly zone that you're proposing? The United States primarily, or a NATO force? How would that play out? I mean, we did it on our own for many, many years in northern and southern Iraq back when I was on active duty in the Air Force. But Mr. Trump's been elected on the plank of, reestablishing peace through strength. And getting out of the endless war policies. How do you think the Trump administration will be able to address that if they choose to go down that path?
I'm going to reveal a few things. First of all, I spoke with his brilliant advisors who are now in charge, will be in charge soon. So I won't speak more before the 20th on this matter. And they all see clearly. They're all strategic in that manner, at least in the agencies that will be in charge of. But Mr. Trump, I'm revealing, for the first time now, I've seen him over the past 2 to 3 years. And he has kind of said, without quoting what he has said to me, because I was his first foreign policy advisor in 2015, actually, December of 2015, that he wants to protect those minorities. Yeah, that policy does not contradict the fact that we want our forces back. So what does that mean in between? It means we're going to go support them so they can support themselves so that we can withdraw. Not what Biden has done was to withdraw from Afghanistan, empower the Taliban, gave them the weapons of the armed forces of Afghanistan, and disbanded those forces and allowed the Taliban to go in. Just the opposite. We are there on the ground, or our allies. It could be Israel, it could be the Arab coalition. We support the Druze. We wait for a better situation in Syria, and we withdraw. That's simple. So that would be potentially, if I understood correctly, what a Trump administration policy could be.
And that follows along the lines of that plank of it reestablishing deterrence, because we've lost deterrence. Deterrence has been lost in multiple areas around the world, and most of it is in the Middle East. You mentioned the Christians and the other Kurds and the Alawites. So how does the group called the Syrian Defense Force, which is, I think, primarily Kurds, if I understood it correctly, but it's made up of different militias from those other minorities too. Will a no-fly zone work to effectively support those groups to deter this new Syrian government and the Turks from, there I said it, deterring our NATO ally from attacking these areas, putting all these groups' lives at risk, which is a very big concern. When you talk to folks, I spoke with a missionary Baptist preacher just last week that lives in northern Iraq's Kurdish area most of the time, and they're very concerned about the potential invasion and combat, both from the Syrian government and the Turkish government, quite frankly.
No, absolutely. They are right. The missionary is right. And we are in touch with the NGOs of all these communities, with their politicians. In the case of, the KRJ, the Kurdish interim government, regional government in Iraq, we speak to their officials, members of their government. So we know exactly what's happening on the ground. Remember, when it was under Saddam Hussein, after the end of the Cold War, what did we establish in northern Iraq to protect Kurds? We didn't send forces. We established a no-fly zone. Now, the no-fly zone doesn't only operate against other incoming, planes, as you know, in the army. It's basically our assets in the air that would stop from the air the advance by tanks or by militias coming from the jihadi side. That's what it is. So if we establish a no-fly zone, and we kind of have it in northwestern Syria with the Kurds. But there need to be a messaging from our president, our administration, to the Turkish government and the President Erdogan that this area, we are protecting the population there. Tell your friends in those militias, which is an indirect way to tell them, not to approach anymore. Where they are, we'll negotiate. But where they are not and when are trying to come, we will empower our allies to stop them. And that could be effective in the north. And that could be effective even more in the northeast of Israel. And you asked me a question, I need to answer that quickly. Who will establish a no-fly zone over the Druze in Syria? Well, Israel is already there. It's only a decision. And Israeli command are looking at the next administration, not this one. This one is ending. What is it that the Trump administration is ready to do? They could divide, no-fly zones. The north would be U.S. and allies, and in the south, Israel has more than enough to establish a no-fly zone. And all of this while waiting for a final solution, for a solid solution for Syria.
Those are all policies that could be very effective, quite frankly. Well, we've got one more question over in the audience, sir, before we get to our last break. And I want to go ahead and take that hand. Shell, go ahead.
We have AJ, sir.
Thank you very much, Shell. Dr. Phares, it's a pleasure, sir. For about over a week now, Turkish media has been running a narrative of the Kurdish forces unconditionally and completely surrendering in February of 2025, while Turkish intelligence is conducting intelligence operations in northern Iraq as we speak. The reason I bring this up, sir, is that there are some Kurds that are caught in the wrong side of history. There's a sub-faction of Hezbollah that is made of completely Kurdish fighters. And I'm just trying to figure out what your opinion on this is, because Turkey is now the main adjutant in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I take advantage of the question to say, well, the Khomeini's militias, including Hezbollah, are not off the hook. They're still operating, and I can imagine they're trying to create tension between the SDF and the pro-Turkish forces, or the HTS, for a reason. The more there are fights between the jihadists inside Syria, Sunni jihadists, and the Kurds, or the Druze right now, the more this could open the possibility for Hezbollah to go in, for Khomeini's militias, meaning Iran regime militia, to come back. So the allies in the region, US-led allies, and that includes Israel, but also the Arab coalition. We will talk about it at another opportunity maybe, but the Arab coalition is ready to come back. And also they are not very happy with any form of return of the Iranian quote-unquote militias, meaning Khomeini's militia. So anybody from our administration in charge of the Middle East strategies need to keep in mind that the regime in Iran, Khomeini's regime, need to be dealt with from a different strategy, and the jihadists, ISIS, HTS, others in Syria and part of Iraq need to be dealt with, which, Colonel, lead me to believe that it is not going to be easy for the Trump administration. They're the best ones to deal with it, but it's not going to be easy, and they need all the support they can from Congress, from at least the majority.
Yeah, hard lessons learned, Dr. Phares. That we've learned in the Middle East is hard power works best, especially when it's an uncertain situation like what we have in Syria and everything. And when we come back from this last break, I'm going to show a little clip about terrorists, known terrorists coming into the southern border. But I want to talk about jihadi terrorists inside the United States now that have reappeared on American soil, and get your thoughts on that and how our work in the region with the moderate Arab coalition nations could help resolve that situation and help us address it. We'll be right back with Dr. Walid Phares here on the Rob Maness Show on More War Monday at Worldview Tube.
Indeed, those encountered at the southern border on the terror watch list skyrocketed to 172, up from 98 last year, 16 the year before, and just 3 in 2020.
We've had 70,000 people in the last 2 years that have crossed our southern border that have been released in the United States that the administration calls special interest aliens. These are individuals, most of them fighting-age men from Iran, from Iraq, from Syria, from other war-torn areas that have crossed into our border and have been released.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday here on Worldview Tube, and my guest is Dr. Walid Phares, an expert on jihadism, the Middle East geostrategic political situation. And Dr. Phares, we've now seen a reappearance of jihadi terrorism inside the United States at a critical moment just before the inauguration of President Trump. And I have to tell the audience, if you didn't see it, today's January 6th, and he has been certified as the 47th president of the United States elect under the electoral college process, by the way. So we have the situation reappear again. They've used an approach that they've used before, radicalized an American soldier over a short period of time to convince them to conduct an attack that was very obvious this time. Major Hassan at Fort Hood down in Texas did not show outwardly his support necessarily of a group called ISIS or Al-Qaeda from an attack perspective, but this individual was actually carrying an ISIS flag. Not to say that it's an ISIS operation, but he certainly was inspired by them. And now when you combine the situation with now the potential jihadi government emerging in Syria, what already exists in Iran with the Khomeiniism and those kinds of things, they both will align on the United States being the great Satan when given the opportunity. How can we use the situation from the Trump administration's perspective of reestablishing deterrence to extend that establishment of deterrence back to the United States now?
Colonel, in one word, you actually answered beyond what I want to say, and that should have been a course in our academic studies. I published a book in 2005, it's old, it's now like 20 years, titled Future Jihad Terror Strategies Against America. And when I wrote the book, no idea that 20 years later, I'm going to be sitting here on your show, other shows, and talking about it again. It's like a nightmare. I have advised and briefed almost all of our national security agencies, from top operatives, about the nature of the jihadist movement. And you're right, that term is, at the end of the day, despite their confrontation among each other, they shoot each other, like the barbarians who were attacking Rome. They were coming from Germany and Austria and the Alps or what have you. They were fighting against each other. What did they do when they got to the gate of Rome? They just attacked Rome altogether. So now should it be the Khomeinists of the Islamic Republic, Islamic regime of Iran? Should it be the Muslim Brotherhood? Should it be Qaeda, Nusra, etc.? Yes, they have their little lives. But at the end of the day, they're all going straight into one direction. Definitely Israel, which they call the small Satan, and then the big Satan, which is the United States. And you're right, absolutely, on that. Now, those who are coming to the United States, those who are born in the United States, and everything in between, who are getting that ideology of jihadism, their mind has been weaponized in a sense that use everything you can get to weaken the United States. Everything you can get. You could come from all over even it's not just about attacks, like physical tectonic attacks, but also weaken the resolve of Americans. When you have hundreds of thousands of people on campuses mostly and on the streets of our urban areas, having the flags of Hamas, having the flags including of Al-Qaeda and of ISIS and of the Caliphate. What we're talking about here is a super penetration of the United States from the borders in the south, definitely that's the biggest gate, to even people getting visas and coming in not vetted. So we have inside our borders, and I message this to all those in charge, unfortunately only in the for the past 4 years, but before that as well, that we will be dealing with them. And what we need, what we see right now, these small attacks, which are terrible to the public, these are the first drops. The cloud is still coming. So in that book from 20 years ago, I have described that what jihadists do when they come here or they are radicalized here is to prepare for a D-Day. I even chapter 13 of Future Jihad explain what would that be. And yes, the next administration in a few days need to have a different outlook of Homeland Security, of the FBI, of the CIA, of the NSA, and of every single supporter of this administration.
So we need to have a sea change in how we view not only jihadism, but how we organize our agencies and our defenses in order to properly address this. And you know, I was in the Pentagon on 9/11, sir. It helped with preparing the fight in Afghanistan, and then went and led a combat squadron of B-1s in that same war. And we still haven't gotten it right, in my opinion. And so the Trump administration sounds like have a really tough challenge, but it's a really good opportunity because they have a lot of disruptors that he's hiring, people that think outside of the government bureaucratic box. I don't know if I want to say it this way, but I will say it. I'm excited about the prospects of reestablishing peace around the world, but especially being able to get not control, but to get the proper focus on this issue in the Middle East, because it's the cancer that not only is eating alive moderate Arab nations and Muslim society, but it continues to kill innocent people in our own country and all around the world, as we saw with the Christmas truck attack in the German Christmas market there. Well, we've got one more hand up. I want to go ahead and take that question before we get to the end of the show. Go ahead.
And then
Shel.
I have a hand up also. Give me a choice at the end.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Shel.
We have Warren, sir.
Hello, Mr. Menace. I just want to ask you a question. So there is a document by House Committee on Homeland Security, and that was 50 jihadist cases in 29 U.S. states, including dozens of attempts to provide material support to ISIS and also to Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, and receiving military time training from ISIS and Hezbollah, and committing fraud. So we know that ISIS and Hezbollah are so they're enemies, and how those terror groups are receiving weapons from.
You have a question for the Colonel, sir?
What's the question, sir?
I said, how those jihadists in the U.S. are receiving weapons from both ISIS and Hezbollah, because those two groups are enemies. So,
Sure, that is a great question. I think Dr. Ferris has touched on it a little bit inside the Middle East, but the audience member is asking the question: How are folks inside America receiving support from Hezbollah and ISIS if they're enemies?
Oh, absolutely. This is a great question. Look at the demonstrations over the past year and a half. Flags of ISIS were there. The flags of Hezbollah were there. So again, it's the strategy of, we may fight against each other over territories in the Middle East, but in America, it's a great state and enemy. So we march separate. We receive support separate or non-separate. But at the end of the day, the goal is to weaken the United States so that it will not stop them in the Middle East. That's the goal. Nothing has changed since 9/11. So do not be surprised if Hezbollah supporters or Daesh supporters are receiving aid from one place. Actually, if it's the Iranian intelligence, Iranian regime, Islamic regime intelligence, they would actually, shower people within the United States to be able to weaken. That's the strategic goal for that question. Now, I have one point to make, if you allow me, Colonel, and then...
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
You've mentioned it before. The United States, any administration, the one that is coming right now, which was superb in creating two things, at least, helping creating the Arab coalition. Remember, in May of 2017, 52 Arab and Muslim leaders listened to a strategic speech by Donald Trump at the time, who encouraged them to fight the jihadists, who encouraged them to stop the Islamic regime of Iran. Those countries have been mismanaged by this current so badly that Saudi Arabia stopped getting close to Israel, that others were concerned. So the next administration can, from day two, I don't want to say on day one because we have many domestic matters, on day two, reorganize the Arab alliance, the Arab coalition. And two, very importantly, the Abraham Accord. I know the Trump administration, the transition is making great appointments for the Abraham Accord, but it needs to have like a whole full support from the United States and from these countries. And on the ground, I'm not forgetting that we have minorities, we have communities without state. They are stateless. You mentioned the Kurds, you mentioned the Druze, you mentioned also the people of Mount Lebanon, all over the place. We have these micro, mini allies. If you put everything together, Arabs and minorities, we have the biggest card in the region.
That's true. That's true. The prospect of the reinvigoration of the Arab coalition and taking the Abraham Accords to the next level, which I thought was the Abraham Accords, I think in the Trump 45 administration is probably the most important foreign policy breakthrough the United States has had, even throughout the 20th century, definitely in the 21st century. So what do you see in the last minute or so here? How do you see that playing out and developing to reestablish that? Because the countries really haven't withdrawn from them. It just kind of stalled, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, just for your audience, testify about something. This is genuinely Donald Trump. Donald Trump reads maps. He was the king of real estate in New York, right? If you make it in New York, you make it around the world. My first briefing with him in December of 2015, that's way before he launched his foreign policy team, he asked about the maps, he asked about realities, and he said, why aren't the moderate Arabs and Israel and the pro-Americans together? There need to be something to be put together. So it came from him. Of course, we provide some facts on the ground. He is the original leader who raised the issue of the Abraham Accord, and I believe, like I said, it will go very far. If it's put together, it would defeat the Khomeinist regime. It would defeat the jihadists. Beyond that, this administration basically needs to play with time very well. I know what are the priorities, and Colonel, you know what they are. We fix ourselves to reform our bureaucracy. Because if the bureaucracy under himself, stopped him from doing many things, he needs to take care of it. But immediately after that, in the realm of foreign policy, peace will have a chance in the next 4 years.
Absolutely right. Well, sir, thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. Where can folks find you on X especially? And will you promise to come back after the administration gets in office so we can discuss what you said to them and how that's going to play out from a policy perspective?
First, it's very easy. If you know how to pronounce my name and write it WALIDPHARES, you put just an app, and you would find me on internet, any platform you want, from X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everything else. I do have a website, but it's much easier to go in through @WaleedFares. And yes, I promise you, I'm so excited to come back once we move into.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fares. We appreciate it. Tomorrow's Transition Tuesday on Worldview Tube here at the Rob Maness Show, and I'll have a retired senior Air Force officer, Mel Cunningham, with me to talk about her breakthrough that led her to make really good decisions during the COVID-19 process. We'll see you then. I'm Rob Maness.